As a global humanitarian relief organization, ShelterBox is working to tackle one of the biggest issues plaguing our world today, and it's this massive displacement of people. There are more people than any time in recorded history that are displaced from disasters, from conflicts, and from the impacts of climate change. Currently, ShelterBox is responding all over the world to some of the biggest crisis situations, from the war in Ukraine, which has displaced a third of the country's population, to the devastating monsoon flooding in Pakistan, which has left 33 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. We also are working in the Horn of Africa and the drought in East Africa, which has the region on the brink of famine. In addition to this work, ShelterBox continues its long-term protracted crisis work in places like the Lake Chad Basin of Africa and also in Syria, where we have been responding for the last 11 years. Shelter, we believe at ShelterBox, is a basic human right. And I believe every person tonight can really relate to how important your home has been over the past 3 years during the pandemic to your safety and the well-being of your family. ShelterBox got started 23 years ago, and we were founded by volunteers. They were part of a global service organization called Rotary. And what was happening in our world at the time is that there was a massive displacement of people in India and Pakistan from the Gujarat earthquake. Our founders wanted to focus on the basic needs that people have. And our basic needs are food, water, and shelter. They focused on the provision of emergency shelter and essential supplies to set up household when you lost your home. The basic premise is, what are the things that you do need to sustain your life? The center of gravity for what we do at ShelterBox is the provision of an emergency shelter. It takes many shapes and sizes. It's often a family emergency tent, and that will serve as the place that a family will call home when they've lost their home in a disaster. But the other things that are so vital are things like basic light. So often you've lost power, so we include waterproof solar lanterns. You've often had contamination of the water source, so we include water purification units, containers to store clean water. Aid organizations bring in food and water, but what are you going to prepare a hot meal? Boil water, restore a sense of routine through meals with a family, so we include a whole stainless steel cook set, as well as waterproof ground mats, blankets, tools, even mosquito nets. One box will serve one family, and one box is $1,000 delivered. So I'd like to take you inside the family emergency tent. This is one of the shelter solutions that we provide at ShelterBox. This here looks like a camping tent. It looks like a recreation tent. It is not. This is the place that a family will call home. It's made for humanitarian purposes for ShelterBox. This, as you can see, is a double wall tent. And this can withstand heavy wind, rain situation. A family will live in this tent for a period of weeks to months after losing their home. You can see inside this tent, which can hold, we've seen 6, 8, up to 10 people. You have areas to create rooms. So here's some privacy screens. This is our mosquito net. And then what you see is where people will gather. So basic things like waterproof ground mats, blankets to get a bit of sleep, your water purification unit, the cook sets, the basic tools and materials that people need to set up household. And what we know is having a shelter is the first step in the recovery process when you've lost your home in an emergency. Now, in addition to the standard relief tent, ShelterBox deploys a whole range of different tented solutions depending on the environmental situation that we're going into. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We are really working to customize the approach based on the unique needs of the families we're serving. One of the ways our organization has been really having better scale and more impact across the world is through our low-cost, high-impact options called our shelter kits. These shelter kits, as you see here inside, contain tarpaulins, and they contain the tools and fixins that can repair a home that's been damaged, like you see in Ukraine right now with the bombing, but it can also create a single room structure like you see here. This will be a home for a family that has lost their home in an emergency. We use these often in places like the Philippines. We're using them currently in Ukraine. And as you can see, we often supplement locally other resources that people will need to build their home. So we could be procuring corrugated iron for the roof, basic framing and timber, resources that are plentiful in the communities that we're serving. So in addition to the tents, the tarp solutions, ShelterBox also has a variety of other solutions that we are really innovating to help bring and meet the unique needs of these situations. One of those items are the Sahelian tents, which we are using in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has had some of the highest waves of displacement in our world, and we are providing durable solutions that will last longer in extreme environments. That also includes places like Syria. We're piloting the tent leveling project, which is gravel, it's sand, and it's a heightened base that you'll put the tent on to help prevent flooding from entering into the tent. In addition, we're using iron net solutions in places like Yemen, where the environmental situation is so extreme that the tents might only last a period of weeks. So we're doing very unique, innovative ways and solutions to help really reinforce the solutions we're providing globally. So there's many types of shelters that we provide, but the purpose is always the same. It's to really provide a place to call home to enable the self-recovery of the families that have been displaced. COVID has put an extraordinary pressure on our organization over the past 3 years, but never in our history has the work of ShelterBox been more important than during the COVID pandemic. So often refugees are left in collective centers, overcrowded evacuation centers, and they don't have a way to mitigate the spread of the infection. So our work's been increasingly important. We've had to adapt over and over again to meet the unique needs, from adapting the kit to include things like soap and hygiene items, to including PPE like sanitizers, masks, gloves, to even altering the ways in which we deploy, which is oftentimes now we are doing remote training on Zoom. So we are committed to continuing to respond. And actually this year is one of our biggest response years in ShelterBox's history. Over the last 23 years, ShelterBox has brought emergency shelter to over 2.5 million people in over 100 countries, including the U.S., across 300 disasters and crisis situations. Some major milestones and some of the big highlights of our responses include the Indian Ocean tsunami. Every single one of those boxes will represent one family that's been served by the organization. We've also worked extensively in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake that left 1.5 million people homeless in an instant. We've worked with Hurricane Harvey in Texas, which displaced hundreds of thousands, across the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, some of the poorest countries in the world, as well as in Syria. And Syria represents the longest and largest piece of our work, where we've been responding to the crisis for over 11 years. Our work in the world's most extreme conflict zones is the reason why in 2018 and in 2019, ShelterBox was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So how do we do it? Really, the power of partnership is what makes the work of ShelterBox possible. We never go it alone. Our longest partnership has been with a global service organization called Rotary International. Rotary has been absolutely instrumental in helping us mount our responses, particularly our natural disaster responses. And it's actually local Rotarians on the ground who are sending information back to ShelterBox. They're helping with the logistics and supply chain, and they do so much to advance the work of ShelterBox. ShelterBox remains the official project partner of Rotary International in emergencies. In addition, ShelterBox coordinates with many other organizations. We collaborate with the United Nations and the Shelter Cluster. We also work with groups like Habitat for Humanity, the Red Cross, as well as lots of local NGOs that we partner with on the ground. One of the ways that ShelterBox has really been able to scale our work over the past 23 years is through our base of volunteers called the SRT, the ShelterBox Response Team. When we were founded, we created a disaster relief training program whereby we harness volunteer service and we train some of the most highly trained and finely skilled people in all of emergency response. They sign up to become a frontline first responder. They go through about a year of training. 1 in 30 people will make it through the program and become a ShelterBox Response Team member. They deploy in teams in any wave of the response, from the initial boots on the ground assessments, to doing beneficiary selection, to coordinating with local agencies and folks on the ground, train the trainers on how to construct the aid, to even doing monitoring and evaluation. These response team members really help the organization go the distance, and it's how we're able to be so many places at once responding across the world. I'd like to give you some highlights of our current work. Right now, we're responding in Pakistan, and we deployed a response team immediately after this severe monsoon flooding. It's devastated the country. We've heard reports that there are 33 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. We immediately deployed the team to Islamabad, and in the past several weeks, we've deployed thousands of shelter solutions, from tents to tarps, mosquito nets, water purification, and lights. And we will continue to respond to that devastating catastrophe in Pakistan. We are also working across the Horn of Africa, where we have been responding to disaster and conflict situations. We've worked extensively in Ethiopia, that has been the center of gravity for a massive displacement due to the Tigray crisis. And we've also been working now on a new project in Somalia, which we're seeing nearly 1 million people displaced and a country on the brink of famine.